The immune system is a very complicated system. We're still learning a lot about our immune system. So it's important to understand the different categories of our immune system to help us simplify some of the immune responses. First thing we do is look at our immune system as a vast, complicated network of cells and tissues that are protecting us from pathogens like viruses and bacteria, protecting us from the toxins that they are known to produce. A lot of bacteria produce toxic substances. And these things are often referred to as antigens. So an antigen is any foreign substance that might get into the body that we can produce an immune response against. So we take the immune system and we divide it into what's called the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. So innate means present at birth. So you have an immune system the moment you're born. But it's a very general protector, meaning it doesn't work very specifically against all different strains of bacteria, doesn't know the difference between different types of bacteria yet. But its job is to be there when you're born, to hopefully prevent pathogens from getting into the body, and if they do, have some mechanism to rid the body of those pathogens. So the key there of the innate system is you're born with it. It's not very specific. It doesn't have any memory. Memory is more for the adaptive system, which means it can remember that specific pathogen, and a second exposure, your immune system will be stronger. The innate system doesn't get stronger. But the innate system can work very well. We take that innate system and we can then divide it into what's known as your first lines of defense and your second lines of defense. First lines of defense are barriers. They help keep microbes out. So it makes sense that your intact skin would be a first line of defense. If you recall, the epidermis has many layers of cells. Those cells are very tightly packed together to form a nice strong barrier. Very few things can penetrate through intact skin. No bacteria can do it. No viruses can do it. They have to get in either through a break in the skin, or they have to be inhaled into the respiratory tract or ingested into the GI tract. Intact skin is very, very powerful barrier. The one thing I can think of that can is a hookworm. So a hookworm can actually burrow through intact skin. Some arthropods can, obviously, like a tick or a mosquito, and they can deliver microbes. But again, that's puncturing the skin. Intact skin is a very strong barrier. Mucous membranes cover the other part of the body that's exposed to the exterior. Your respiratory tract, your GI tract, your urinary tract, your reproductive tracts all have mucous membranes that act as a barrier. Not as strong as your skin, but they're pretty decent barriers. They have mucus. They can produce some other secretions that can act as a first line of defense. Then you have what's called the normal microbiota. The normal microbiota are all the bacteria, and there are some other organisms like yeast growing inside of us that help act as a barrier. There's a huge push to learn more about our microbiota. We found out how useful it is, how protective it is, how it establishes when we're born, so we have bacteria growing on us and in us. And these are the good ones. These are what we often call probiotic. When you take a probiotic pill, quite often that's bacteria you're ingesting. Happens to be the bacteria that, if we allow this bacteria to grow and flourish, it'll prevent pathogens from growing and flourishing. So it takes up a lot of areas in our body where invading organisms, pathogens, could establish a community and cause an infection. So you'll learn all about that cool stuff when you get to microbiology. But what if some organism gets in? Well, we want to have a backup. We want to have a second line of defense of our innate system. These include your phagocytes, so cells that can phagocytose, like neutrophils, eosinophils, dendritic cells, macrophages are the main ones. You can produce an inflammatory response, which we'll look closely at what that entails. You produce a fever. So a fever, you're born with the ability to produce a fever. A fever is good for you unless it gets too high or for too long of a period of time. But fever is going to help boost our immune responses. And then you've got some other antimicrobial substances that can also be there waiting if something penetrates in. So all those are your innate system. The adaptive system has two important properties. One is it has specificity, meaning it can specifically recognize different strains of viruses. It can recognize different strains of bacteria. It can recognize very, very specific proteins that these microbes have. Then it has memory. It can remember that it once fought that microbe, and it will remember how it did it. And if it ever gets in again, you'll have immunity to it, meaning you'll have cells there waiting, and your adaptive system can destroy that microbe much quicker the second time it sees it. So this system involves your lymphocytes, your T lymphocytes or T cells, your B lymphocytes or B cells, and the antibodies that your B cells produce. So B cells produce antibodies. T cells don't, but they also have a very important function, and they can destroy cells that are harboring viruses. That's a very important function of a T cell. So hopefully, if you do get sick with a virus or a bacterium, these three lines of defense will eventually allow you to overcome that infectious organism. If your third line of defense doesn't do it, then you're in trouble. Then you could possibly die. Or our fourth line of defense is medications. So we could take an antiviral, we could take an antibiotic, we could take an antifungal, we could take an antiprotozoan drug to try to help these three lines of defense. This is a table, but it just helps us appreciate some of these other things that we have that you usually think of belonging to other systems, but they are acting as a first line of defense. Like your skin, we talked about as a barrier, mucous membranes we mentioned. So mucus helps in your innate immune system. Hairs help filter out microbes. So we're talking about the hairs in your nose, nasal hairs. Don't clip them. They're filtering. Don't laugh at the old guy who has hairs sticking out of his nose. That's his filtering mechanism. They're helping to get rid of any microbes that are in the air we breathe. Then, further down the respiratory tract, you have cilia, little cellular hairs, which together with the mucus trap microbes, prevent them from getting down into the lungs. Tear production. Tears help flush things off your eyes. So there's microbes that land on your eyes, and your tears are helping to flush them. Saliva isn't just a digestive secretion. It helps wash microbes off the surface of your teeth. Saliva has an enzyme down here called lysozyme that destroys bacteria. Urine isn't just a waste product, it's also flushing the urinary tract. Urine is also acidic. A lot of secretions that our body produces are acidic, and microbes don't really like acidity. They like very, very neutral environments. So acidic secretions are very useful in helping to prevent microbial growth. Sometimes we have to defecate and vomit. Sometimes there's a microbe in our GI tract. Sometimes that microbe or toxin from that microbe initiates vomiting and initiates a very, very quick defecation we call diarrhea. And those are mechanisms to help expel that microbe or those toxins from the GI tract. Chemical factors like sebum, that's the oily material on your skin, very acidic, helps inhibit growth. Lysozyme is an enzyme that kills bacteria. We've found that enzyme in sweat, tears, saliva, nasal secretions, all kinds of secretions contain lysozyme. Your stomach is very acidic, so it can kill microbes that you ingest daily. And vaginal secretions are acidic. And that acidity of the vagina helps to discourage bacterial growth and helps to limit the growth in that location. So these are all first lines of defense. Skin, mucous membranes, and other secretions. In the next video, we're going to get into the second lines of defense. So these are still innate defenses, still part of your innate immune system, but they're there waiting for the time that a pathogen might get by your barriers. We have some microbial substances, some cells. We can produce inflammation and fever, and those are all part of our second lines of defense.